Our first story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil rock.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think's an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
You're listening to Riff Worship, the podcast that attempts to answer the question, what makes a riff? Why do we worship? All things the riff. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Paulson. With me, as always, is my very, very good friend, Dylan Adams. Dylan, how are you, buddy?
Doing well, bud. How about yourself?
I'm great. We have a fantastic guest today. This is a person I would consider exactly why we do podcasts like this. I've been listening to this man for a long time. He is a songwriter, guitar player, record producer, studio owner. I am, of course, talking about Andy LaRocque of King Diamond and Sonic Train Studios. Andy, how are you, man? Thank you so much for joining us.
Fine, thank you. Hope you guys are okay there.
Oh, yeah. It's a little early, but we're good, man. We're ready to rock.
Very early. Never too early for rock and roll,
That's it. I agree.
That is a true statement.
I guess I want to ask first, since, I think oftentimes people look at your lead playing and, the catalog speaks for itself. But I think what always interested me personally was your songwriting ability, your riff writing ability. The first question I'd like to toss to you is, what makes a riff to you? Why is a riff in a song so important? Like, why? What sticks out to you? Is there a particular thing? Like, what makes a riff to Andy LaRocque?
I think it's going to be catchy. There could be like a combination of the notes and the tempo of the rhythm itself. And, it's really hard to say. You just notice that some riffs are really, really catchy and some are not, like Smoke on Water, for example. Yeah, that's a catchy riff. And if you go back to the 70s, there were a lot of really catchy riffs too, like, AC/DC, back in the 70s, Black Sabbath, of course, the first album with Black Sabbath, the first song, amazing. And one of the really good riffs I got hooked by in my early days was actually Rock Bottom with the band UFO, Michael Schenker.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
That riff, amazing riff. And a couple of years later, Randy Rhoads with Ozzy, the first album, Crazy Train. Yeah. That opening riff is just amazing. It's still, stuck in my head, It's an amazing riff. And I think that's a combination of really good notes and rhythm, and a lot of cool things, and of course the sound too,
Absolutely. I mean, the two you just mentioned, those are practically in our DNA at this point. Like I immediately went to those songs in my head. I could hear it. And you kind of mentioned those early days, and I feel like I'd like to go back, to maybe that era, maybe even before you got into heavy metal and before you picked up a guitar. Obviously you're based in Sweden, you're from Sweden. What was going on musically when you were growing up? Like, do you remember some of the styles of music that were popular at the time? Like, what were the things that you were getting into? What were you hearing at home?
I was always into melodic music. It could be some kind of pop music. ABBA was playing in the background all the time.
Oh, sure.
But also bands like Sweet, Slade, T-Rex, early Alice Cooper. And a few years later, I got into Blue Oyster Cult a little bit, and of course Black Sabbath, stuff like that. But when I first started listening to radio, that was a lot of glam rock going on in the 1973, 74, and 75, around that area. Everything that was played on radio that time, I got kind of influenced by and picked up, and then, I was looking for something heavier, like, I would say Black Sabbath, Kiss, stuff like that, But it started out with the glam rock area in the mid-70s, that's for sure.
What's all good, like pop writing sensibility? And I can tell, like you mentioned with the catchiness, I think there's like certainly something to be said about, Mark Bolan and T-Rex. Like when I listen to that, there's just good songwriting structure. I maybe fast forward now, obviously Sweden is kind of known around the world for its history in heavy metal. What, you are recording a lot of bands. You've been very busy this year. What do you say? What do you think about the current state of music in Sweden? Is there, what's the metal scene like? What's the music scene like in general? Are there anything that you've noticed while recording there?
I would say nothing extremely, different really from the pre-corona kind of times. It's slowly growing back up together again with the club scene, and shows are coming back, to kind of where it was before the COVID times, So I wouldn't say there's a major difference right now from what I have seen so far, because I know a lot of my friends and a lot of bands are still they're out now playing on festivals and all that, So I can't really tell that has been a big change of anything, except for everything has gone up in prices, like renting buses and trucks and, all that is crazy now, That's all I know. But I mean, we haven't been out touring with King Diamond since late 19. So it's going to be interesting to come back,
Andy, you touched on something earlier regarding guitar tone, and I wanted to ask a question. Sometimes a guitar tone can dictate how the riff is written, how the riff may feel, just by adjusting an amplifier settings, just by adjusting, a tone knob on a guitar. Do you see that? Do you see that with your playing as well? Do you see that with anything you've written in the past of, hey, I've got this type of guitar sound, this thing's coming out of me. This type of guitar sound, this is coming out of me.
I think you're totally right on it. Depending on what kind of guitar I pick up, if it's like an old, Les Paul, whatever, it's just I tend to play certain kind of riffs on that, or the old Gibson Flying V I have, It's just that tone of that guitar just makes me play different things, and so does modern guitars too. I'm working with ESP guitars, amazing guitars, but they also have a lot of different models, of course, so that's also a little bit, depending on what model you pick up and play, it makes you play different things. That's weird, but that's the way it is. So the tone definitely affects or, inspires you to play different things. That's for sure.
It's been a while since you've worked with King Diamond a little bit and touring wise, but you're coming to us from your absolutely gorgeous studio, Sonic Train, in Sweden. You've certainly remained busy. I know you've been working with some bands as of late, Shining, Voodoo Gods, Imperial Child. This was I believe you started perhaps like recording or owning a studio perhaps in like the mid 90s. It seems like you've always been kind of like doing some production here and there on your own records, but what drew you to kind of start your own studio and start recording bands as yourself?
It's a long story. I'll try to make it short. But, when we were in the studio, the first albums back like mid 80s, I just thought it was boring to, hang around and listen to when Mickey was doing sound check, and the sound engineer was like, oh, one more time. Hours, hitting the toms and stuff, It's like, oh man, boring, I just want to play, when you're a young kid, you just want to play, and have it done. But all that actually, got stuck somewhere, in my head, So after a couple of years, when we've been in the studio for a couple of albums, I kind of remember things we did back then, what kind of microphones we used for certain things, and what kind of amplifiers we used, in the studio, what kind of mixing console and all kinds of stuff, So I, after a couple of years, thought that, this is kind of interesting to, create things in the studio in a certain way. And a few years later, it actually started out when I thought I really need something to record my riffs on that sounds decent, so I can present that for the other guys in the band. So I bought like a small, 4-track tape machine, drum machine, so I could, just do basic things, I got it from there. So I bought like an eight track machine, a small console, and people started to say like, "Hey, that sounds really good. Maybe you can record our band," stuff like that. So that was growing. So back in, I think it was 95, I finally started out with like starting professionally, with a 24 track machine, tape machine, and a bigger console, and some great speakers and great microphones and stuff, So I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and I learned from the different producers we've been working with what to use and why you should use that and why you should do that. I did not read very much about it. I just, learned by doing, back then. And that's still, it's still there,
Absolutely. Well, you noticed you mentioned several, tools and technology that you would have had back then. As someone who's, played on records for a long time, someone who's produced records for a long time, is there anything that you noticed as far as like technology, like trends? I mean, you've probably seen it all at this point. Is there anything you wish you had? Is there anything that you have now that you wish you had back then? Or is there technology that surprised you that's kind of like lasted, from those initial days that you still use to this day?
Interesting question. Well, you still use the same kind of microphones as you used like 40 years ago, actually, That's one thing that stays the same, which is really good. I mean, there has been coming up so many new microphones, which, can be really good too, but the classics in the end, they rule. Then, of course, I mean, when the computer came into recording, I mean, that's many years ago now, of course, that was like a revolutionary, of course, and I would never go back to a tape machine, it's just a big hazard, so that was a big game changer right there, in my opinion, and I think everybody agrees with me. I mean, some people still think that, tape machine sounds really good and stuff. Yeah, of course, it can sound really good if it's well adjusted and all that stuff, but I'd never go back to that, that's too much of a hassle, and, computers the shit, to record on now if you got a right setup, that's for sure.
I can only imagine having to sit there and cut the tape and splice the tape and having to go through that, doing punch-ins, the whole nine. I mean, forbid you had to do another take or you messed up a take and the tape's running, because I know tape was expensive, and it's probably even more expensive now at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, man. I haven't used that for 20 years, I believe, but I mean, just a simple thing that, like undo, you can't really do that on tape,
Right.
Control Z is like, I mean, if you erase something, you have to re-record it. That's as easy as that, and sometimes you erase things by accident, and you're fucked, So I really, think that the computer is, man, it's such a big difference. I'll never go back to tape. And I mean, nowadays there are so many emulators and simulators that can actually emulate tape, sound tape, and all that. So I don't see that as a big problem at all.
Well, as like as a producer and an owner, I'm sure it comes with its own challenges. Is there anything, it's obviously a learning process. Is there anything that any advice you would give to yourself on the first day of like, all right, Sonic Train Studios, here we go. Like what have you learned from that first initial day till now? Like what, sorts of tips and tricks would you give yourself on as a younger man, as a younger Andy LaRocque?
Oh man, a lot.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for like 30 years. So one thing that's really crucial is that don't rush things, because if you rush things, it's not going to be good. I mean, you really got to take time about things, and be careful, with everything, And crucial thing is that, I always start with the drums, for example, putting up mics on the drums, when I produce bands, and I just make sure the drums sounds good and all the takes of the drums are really good, because if the drums are shitty, everything else is going to suffer, The drums is like the base of everything in rock and roll, in my opinion, At least when you start recording that, when you're recording things, the drums so important, that they sound good, because if they do, everything else going to sound killer, you know. I mean, putting on the guitars and a good drum kit, you know, is great. And also the bass and vocals, of course, you know. So if you're too rushed with things in the beginning, it's not going to be good, you know. And that's something I really learned, you know. So I really try to take my time, you know, putting up a really good sound when we start recording. And of course, it's really important too. And I tell all the bands, please make sure you rehearse and practice and all that, you know, because it's going to take a lot of time in the studio and cost a lot of money too. And make sure your instruments are all set up and all that, you know, because that's also takes a lot of time, you know. So, yeah.
I'm sure they appreciate all that care and energy that goes into it. And you've mentioned a couple things already, like, you know, maybe like your initial process with working with a band. You mentioned some great advice. Are there any other like mistakes that you see from bands that like come in? Like, would you give any, aside from like maybe, hey, you got to have this rehearsed, you know, time is money, obviously. Is there any other mistakes that you see maybe younger bands making when they enter in a professional studio for the first time?
Yeah, I would say younger bands, you know, they spend a lot of time in the rehearsal room, but I mean, you can't really hear everything that clear in the rehearsal room. So, I mean, the classic thing is like, wow, what are you playing there when they come to the studio? Oh, I'm playing this. What are you playing? Totally different, you know, totally different things, you know, I mean, between the guitarists, for example, and even the drums, you know, can be things like the other guys in the band didn't really hear because they've been in a loud rehearsal room, you know. So I usually tell them to sit down and kind of analyze what you guys are doing, you know, like unplugged, you know what I'm saying? Like go through the riffs so both guitarists know what the other guys doing and analyze your stuff, you know. And also another thing would be, I think like 30 years ago, band, they rehearsed more than they do nowadays. I think that's a trend. You know, they go into the studio and say, hey, the engineer or producer will fix that, you know. I mean, that's a quick fix, you know, if we don't play the right things, you know, I mean, the producer will fix that, you know. Yeah, of course, you can fix pretty much everything, but it's going to take time and it's going to cost you money, you know. So be well prepared before you go to the studio. That's for sure.
It's important. Well, and you've certainly had a long list of bands that you've recorded. You've recorded obviously a lot of your own bands. You know, I always wondered too, is it hard to kind of take the hat off at certain times when you're like, all right, I'm a producer now. I have to kind of look at it from behind the booth. Do you find there are any challenges when going on the other side of the glass to just be a player? You know, do you find it easy? I always wonder that.
There is. You know, I usually don't like mixing my own music.
Okay.
I mean, I try to leave it to someone else because, well, when I'm a musician, you know, I want to be a musician and just play and let loose, you know, and let someone else, you know, take care of everything. And I would like to be produced myself, you know, I mean, by someone who can tell me, okay, do this and that, or, you know, of course, you know, I can record stuff, no problem, you know, but, you know, when it comes to the mixing my own stuff, it's awesome to let someone else do that, you know. I think that's really good because then you can be a musician 100%, you know, instead of kind of, you know, going between both of the roles you have, you know.
I'd like to take a step back again too, if I may, just about some of your origins as well. Obviously, we've been talking about some of your influences, some of your history. Was there a point, like, do you remember an instance where, all right, I want to play guitar? Like, what actually drove you to picking up a guitar and start playing and learning music?
Oh, I think that was mid-70s.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard a band in my hometown then, Gothenburg, that were playing Status Quo, you know, Status Quo, the British rock and roll band.
Sure.
They were playing Status Quo songs, you know, and they were a couple of years older than me. I was just like 12 at the time. And I went to their rehearsal room and I thought, hey, man, this sounds great, you know. I mean, I thought they were great, you know, doing like covers on a lot of the Status Quo songs, you know, or the classical Status Quo songs from like early to 75 and whatever, you know. I thought, wow, this is cool. If they can do it, I'm gonna try myself too. So I got an acoustic guitar, and a few months later I got a shitty electric guitar, and I started out like that, you know, and listening to Alice Cooper, you know, and all kinds of stuff, you know, around that area too. But Status Quo and that band doing the covers of Status Quo was actually the trigger of everything, I believe, you know. And I wasn't into playing solos at all in the beginning. I was just focusing on rhythms for a long time, actually. I was, you know, a rhythm guitarist. And I think that's really essential, you know, to be able to do good rhythms, you know. And then slowly, you know, after a couple of years, started out with like melody solos, like influenced by Thin Lizzy, for example.
Yeah.
You know, and then later, you know, Randy Rhoads and Michael Schenker, you know, and all that came into my life, of course, you know.
Do you remember maybe what was your first? Do you remember the first concert you attended that came through Gothenburg? I know you mentioned a few acts. Did any of those bands come through that you remember seeing?
Yeah, I think I was 12 years old, and I was about to go to Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare.
There you go.
But my parents said, "Hey, man, you're too young, and you know, no, we don't want to let you go there." Blah blah blah, blah, you know. And then just a few months later, I went to see Blue Oyster Cult on their on your feet or on your knees tour, I believe. You know, like, so that was, I was still 12 years old, and that was the first, you know, concert I saw. You know, which was just, wow, that was so cool.
So 12 years old. You're seeing BOC, you're starting to play guitar a little bit here. At what point do you start transitioning into playing with other people and playing live? Do you remember some of the people that you first initially started playing around with?
Yeah, that was kind of early, you know. Me and a couple of friends had a band down the basement, you know, and we played a few Kiss things, you know, and just made up a couple of songs, you know, when I was about 13, I believe, you know. But my first live concert was probably in school when I was about 14, maybe, you know. That's about it. And then, you know, meeting other people, you know, and going through different bands and, you know, meeting more people, you know, and slowly building up, you know, your thing, you know.
Well, one person in particular that always seems to kind of stick out in your long journey is Mickey D. Like, how do you guys get into contact with each other? How do you meet?
The first time was early 80s, I believe, because he was in a different band, you know, playing kind of the same style, little, you know, melodic hard rock kind of thing in Gothenburg area as well, you know. And we just, you know, got to know each other, you know, partying a little bit together, you know, and it's a long story.
Yeah, I understand.
You know, but then we played a little bit together, you know, for a while, and he moved to Denmark with some guys to play down there with a Danish singer. And he did that for a couple of years. It didn't work out that good. Then he met King in Merciful Fate. And when King was doing his own thing, Mickey was asked to join as a drummer. And this was like 80, 85 then, early 85. So Mickey quit that other Danish band he had, and he joined King Diamond. And then they had problems with the guitarist in the studio. So Mickey called me and said, "Hey, Andy, you got to come down here, you know, and do an audition with us, you know, because it doesn't really work out with the guy we have now." So 2 days after, I quit my job, took my Marshall amp, my guitar, took the train down to Copenhagen from Gothenburg. I went into the studio, talked a little bit to the guys, you know, and they asked me to play around a little bit with a song called Dressed in White on the first King Diamond album. I sat down and just did my thing a couple of times, you know, and they recorded it. And okay, I just waited, you know, for them to let me know something, you know. And after a while, King came out and said, "Okay, you're in the band, you're hired." So that's cool. I was 22 years old, you know, and dreaming of rock and roll, you know.
What a mind bender to know that at 22 years old, because I know where I was at 22 years old. and I know I know stepping into something like that had to be a complete world changer for you, a complete life changer for you. I mean, as we're proof now.
Yeah, it was, of course. I mean, it was like it's like now or never. And I thought it was a great opportunity to do my thing. And I wasn't really even that nervous when I came into the studio. I've been in the studio a couple of times before, and I just did my thing, I believe, and of course I was excited, but I wasn't really nervous, because I always, thought that being in the studio is like very creative. And if you don't do it good the first time, the first take in the studio, you get another chance, It's different when you play live, of course, because it's now or never, I did my thing, and I thought the guys were great, and we got along good, and yeah, I've been in the band for some years now.
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah, just
I mean, getting those first initial albums under your belt. The one that always sticks out to me and recently celebrated a 35th anniversary is Them. Looking back on it now, I know there were some challenges. You had some lineup changes. I wonder what was the headspace like going into making Them. I know it's kind of almost like with Fatal Portrait and to Abigail, obviously there's like a clear progression there, and maybe with Abigail and Them there's like maybe more of a lateral progression. But I mean, some of the most progressive guitar work, I feel like, just listening to this record again, preparing for this interview, I mean, some of the stuff you're doing on here is absolutely insane. I wonder, maybe take us through a little bit of what you were thinking going, obviously there's some lineup changes. Were there any stresses? Like what was going through your head going into recording and writing Them?
Oh man. To be honest to you, I mean, we had a really good album with Abigail, the year before. That was like melodic,
Yeah.
Very, very fucking cool album in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And, I think we just thought that we needed to do, not that we needed, because it's not that we need to do anything really. It's just that we just follow our hearts, when we write music, of course, we don't do it for other people. We do what we think is right, and hopefully other people will like it, So I guess that's the same feel we had with Them back then, when we wrote the music. It turned out to be a little heavier, more progressive, and, that kind of mirrors the whole album in a certain way, just hard and heavy, and progressive. That's what we wanted to do at that time, and I think it turned out to be a really good album, and maybe a different thing that kind of affected everything on the album was that when we started writing the music for that album, we weren't sure that the bass player was still in the band, or Michael Denner wasn't in the band either. So we were actually looking for a bass player and a new guitarist, while we were writing music for the album, So that might also be a reason why it's a little bit different from the previous ones,
Well, that's a good point. And, what kind of surprised me, and maybe people don't often see, like King Diamond, he's, at the front of the stage, he's got this amazing vocal style. Maybe you wouldn't take him for a guitar player, but it seemed like you guys were kind of riffing back and forth through this writing process with losing a member or losing your guitar player. What can you speak? Can you speak to his chops? Like, what is King Diamond like as a guitar player? If you guys are kind of working on these songs together.
Well, we're not kind of working together in that sense, because he's writing his songs, and he composes on guitar. That's what he does,
Gotcha.
But he's got a very determined mind about how he wants it to be played. He plays his riff for me when we sit down, and let's say we record the rhythm guitars for the album, and he sits there with the guitar, and he tells me, "Oh, I want this riff to be played like this, in a certain way, and I kind of play it a little looser or a little heavier, stuff like that, So he's really determined about how we want things, to be played. And I mean, he composes everything on guitar, and he plays a little keyboard too, so that's what he does. And then I just try to translate, his riffs down to the real, recording of the guitars on the album. And it's not easy, I tell you.
Yeah.
So with the writing of not just this album in particular, but working with King on these albums, obviously he is known for his grand concepts, his grand lyrical prowess. With that in mind, does the concept influence the writing? With, say we come up with a concept like you did for them, is the music influenced by the lyrical concept, or vice versa? Are you writing something to go, okay, here's the concept. This needs to sound a little bit more haunting in this part, or this needs to sound a little bit darker in this part, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's actually a combination of both.
Okay.
Both things you were talking about here, because sometimes, a riff can, of course, inspire King to write certain things around that riff. And when King has a few storylines, he will always let me know, some of the ideas and stuff, and of course that inspires me too to write some riffs or even songs, in a certain direction, So I really think it's a combination of both, that interacts.
Well, obviously, being down a few members, I'm sure has its challenges, but it also seems like with the additions of a new bass player and guitar player, it really kind of maybe reinvigorated the energy of the band going into this record. What can you say about Pete Black and also Hal Patino? Like, what was their entrance into the band for you, like, from your perspective? Like, how do you feel like they affected the record going forward?
No, I think they did a great job back then. Hal was a very energetic bass player at that time, with a little different and also modern sound. And he was playing with the pick, for example, and Tim Hansen was playing, finger picked thing,
Yeah.
So it made, the bass sound a little, more distinct and heavier. And same with Pete Black, a little more aggressive style than Michael Denner. I love Michael Denner. He's a great guitarist and everything, but I think Pete Black came into that album and did a great job too. It was just a little different and more aggressive style than the melodic style that Michael Denner had on the previous albums. So they definitely affected, the sound of the album too.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were recording at like pretty much a brand new studio, right? Were you one of the first bands to record at that studio in Copenhagen?
Yeah. I think it was called MIDI Music or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Something like that, I believe. So we were one of the first bands recording there, yes. It was a pretty cool studio with great equipment and everything, But I guess they didn't really tune in their speakers because the production is kind of thin,
So how quickly, what did you start with, was it like more of a rhythm thing first? Like Mickey would lay down his tracks and you maybe laid down rhythm, or how was it structured going into the studio for you? Do you remember?
We usually start with the drums, as usual, and I play along with Mickey back then. We never really used a click track or anything like that. We just, we just came from the rehearsal room. We rehearsed, like crazy for days and days. 6 days a week. Easily. So we just came from there, and everything was like really well rehearsed when we got into the studio. So it was usually me and Mickey. I was laying down like a cue track of the guitars for Mickey, and we were laying down the basics of that, and then we started with the other rhythm guitar and then bass on top of that, and then building everything up, So kind of a classic way, and that's the way I still do it here in the studio, But now we usually, you play with the click track and the metronome, starting with the drums and the pre-production, usually just one guitar or maybe two guitars, and then building everything up, Do
you remember some of the gear you might have been we were using, that like Gibson V, perhaps some of the amp work that you've been working on that record?
I was using the Marshall JCM 800s,
Classic.
I believe.
Yep.
and some custom cabinets with 412s and Celestian vintage 30s, of course. I still have the cabinets.
Oh yeah.
Oh, cool.
I still have some of the cabinets, at least. Still sounds great.
That's awesome.
And that was what I was using for rhythms. For solo, I was using a Gallien-Kruger.
Okay.
The small kind of combo amp, with two small speakers. I was using that for leads together with Ibanez tube screamer, and just mic'd up the small speakers, and it sounds great. And I actually did that, on the later albums too, for Conspiracy and also The Eye.
That's wild to hear that it was a Gallien-Kruger, because they're predominantly known as a bass amplifier.
Yeah, exactly. But they started out with a guitar amplifier, actually. That sounds really good. I've been trying to find one, but they were really hard to find. But it's going to be the first model. It's called the 250ML, I believe, and they're great. And I heard, after I was using that, then we were working with Chris Tangaridis as a producer.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing the Painkiller with Priest.
Yeah,
and he told me that he got the Priest guys to try that Gallien-Kruger thing out with that specific microphone and everything, and I don't know if they used that, but they sure tried it.
Obviously there was a lot of energy and effort that went into creating this record, and it's really stood the test of time, and we're still talking about it, 35 years later. I wonder, and perhaps you can speak to this for any of your records, like, once it's done and it's out there in the world, like, what is that? How do you feel? Like, is it straight on to the next thing, or like, do you give yourself time to like kind of, all right, wow, I did this thing? Like, for any of your records, when it's finally out there and out there in the world for people to listen to, what was that feeling like, just finally being done and getting those songs out there for people to listen to?
I think in the beginning it was a bigger thing than it is now when you release something. The first, let's say, 4 or 5 albums was just a major wow. It's so cool, to have something released and stuff, But when you release something now, it's more like a work thing, You do it, you release it, and then you go on to the next thing, But back then, you had some time to go back and listen to everything, on the album, and I mean that was a totally different feel back then, especially on the first couple of albums than it is now when you release things, because now it's like it feels like. Of course, it's special, to the fans and everything. But for you, working as a musician and producer, it's kind of a everyday thing nowadays, if you know what I mean. You're so used to doing that all the time, So it's like no big deal in that sense anymore, Except for, of course, I'm looking forward to the next album with Diamond.
Hey,
that's going to be cool.
So are we.
Because
yeah, absolutely.
It's a long time since we did something, So that's going to be fun.
Love the single. I'm certainly ready to see you guys live again. And I wanted to ask too, I mean, with all of the tempo changes and all of the technical playing, all the layers that are on this record, I know you guys have been playing a lot of these songs live for a long time, but what is the challenge in bringing something like that to life? Not only, I mean, from the record, it's there, like I can listen to it, and there's, tools that we can use to make that happen. But in the live, it's just you and the audience. Like how was that bring to a live setting?
I mean, if you don't play too many of the progressive songs, I think it's really cool to blend in that into the live show, But I mean, it's also super cool to play some of the simpler songs. For example, Halloween, which is a really simple song, but the audience just loves it, So I think a good combination of a few really progressive songs, that you really have to be focused on and concentrated when you play them, that's really good, together with some really kind of loose songs, for example, like Halloween, Combination of that makes it fun to play live, that's for sure.
One of the things that I think really introduced me to this record in particular is the music video. I just can picture it in my mind. You'd done a video before this, perhaps, correct, with Abigail?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And so, what was I always wondered like what the atmosphere was like on the set. It's like dark, it's foggy. There's this castle. What was it like showing up on set and putting this down?
That was magic.
Yeah.
That was totally magic. I mean, coming to southern of England. I believe this was somewhere outside Bath. If I recall, I'm not sure about it. I can't really remember the location. People's been asking me about that, but I can't remember. There might be some documentation about that,
Sure.
but that was just magic. I mean, we came there in the daytime, early in the morning, actually, to see this like, wow, it's amazing, great place, and then filming, when the sun was down and all that, that was just amazing. That was magic, that was so cool to do that, and then see the final result, of course, too. It was great, with the actors and all that, involved. Awesome. That was really cool.
Did I think I read somewhere you perhaps broke a guitar on that set? I
sure did. That was one of the guitars, that I built myself, actually, from just a piece of wood. It's not like, I bought a neck there and a body there and stuff. This was actually made from a piece of wood, and it was really good. I still have it. Great guitar, inspired by the Randall Rhodes V, the Jackson V.
Yeah.
And I still have it, as I said, but I haven't really used it much, since that, time, because in the video, I kind of threw it down the lawn and picked it up, and I later saw that the point of the guitar, the one of the ends of the guitar were actually missing. It was like a couple of inches. It was like, oh no, it's still there in the lawn. I didn't see it until later, so that was too late, and it's still like that. Haven't done anything about it, But it might be a cool thing if I ever sell that guitar,
Yeah, absolutely, a little character. So in the present day of King Diamond, you mentioned, like obviously there's been an album in the works. There's been a single out for a few years now. Can we look forward to some new King Diamond in 2023? I don't know how much you can divulge, but we're certainly looking forward to it.
Everyone's looking forward to that, and I sent King a bunch of songs that we actually have started working on, with little arrangement wise and all that, and I know that he's got so many ideas in his head, to put things down, so, but then, Merciful Fate came in between, doing the last year's summer tour and also the autumn tour, and I think they're working on like a single right now. As soon as they're done with that, which will be soon, I hope, we will pick up the King Diamond stuff again, so it's really hard to say when it's going to be, but I really hope it's going to be soon, because I'm looking forward to start working with the music again, So we have ideas, we have songs. It's just a matter of, putting everything together and start recording it, And I know you guys been waiting for a long time, but we won't disappoint you.
Is there a particular goal in mind when you put out a record? Like, what do you hope people get out when they listen to your playing?
Wow, that's a tricky question. Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope they like the music, of course.
Yes.
I mean, I never really considered myself as a super technical guitarist, so I always consider myself as a rhythm guitar player to start with first, that, hopefully, they think there's a good song going on, and I've been a melodic solo player, so hopefully it, hopefully just people like what I'm doing, I mean, I don't really know what to answer that question, I mean, I do my thing, and I really hope that I hope that they like it.
I think it certainly comes through. I've never heard anybody quite like you. So, I mean, you're very unique, and I always get a kick out of, especially kind of revisiting some of these records now, just some of the details that you're painting with such, all these different brushes and such. I wonder too, we've been kind of talking about your production work as well. And, this modern era of like writing music. Do you ever find time? Did you listen to much? Is there anything that when you're surrounded by music all the time? So I always wonder, like, do you ever find time to listen to new music? Or are you just like, I can't, I've done it all day long. I don't know if I could sit with this now.
Exactly like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm working with like music 5, 6, or sometimes even 7 days a week, from like early in the morning till like kind of late in the night, So when you get home, you just want to have silence, usually, and I never put on like a metal album, when I'm back home, because, I start to analyze and I start to work, I couldn't do that, But when in the studio, I listen to, of course, the bands that come in here. And also they usually, hey, Andy, have you heard this? You got to listen to this, and then we sit down and listen to their influences and, pick up a lot of things from that, of course, So I'm loaded with music, that's for sure. So when I'm outside the studio, I try to get inspired by silence.
So, with that in mind, we normally do kind of a rundown of what we've been listening to lately. But maybe kind of a different spin on that question for you is, what would be maybe a couple songs or one or two, maybe 3 records from maybe your catalog that would best define you as a player, that you would want people to maybe dig into as a gateway to get into, anything from your catalog? What would those be?
I would say Welcome Home would be a good song because it's great solos and everything. I would say Sleepless Nights.
Oh, yeah.
And I would probably say A Mansion in Darkness.
Oh, yeah. I like that. I like those picks.
Those 3 songs, they good songs. Hopefully some good solos on it too. That would be a good thing for people to listen to if they never heard us. Great vocals, great lyrics. Great atmosphere. Which is really important.
I love the vocal delivery on Sleepless Nights so much. That is definitely like a top tier king track for me. I kind of, maybe to wrap things up, please, I'd like to know, what are all the things you got working on, maybe in production wise, maybe some bands that you're working with this year. What do you hope to accomplish this year in 2023?
First of all, I hope that we can pick up, working with the King Diamond stuff again, of course,
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to King a few weeks ago, and he said that as soon as they're done with Merciful Fate now, we'll pick that up again and start working on that, full time. So of course, that's the priority. But then, since we haven't been out playing, for a long time, that's going to be fun too, to kind of prepare for, hopefully next year we'll be out doing that, But then, in the studio this year, I'm working right now with a band called Voodoo Gods, a German band with members from Poland and the US and, all over the world. And later this year, there will be a Norwegian band called Cold coming in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, I got to check the schedule, but it's getting there, it's getting full, I've been talking with Lord Belial, Swedish black metal band too.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're probably not coming in this fall, but maybe to the early next year. And I'm actually now talking with an Armenian band.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Called Ayas. They've been around for like 35 or almost 40 years playing heavy metal, So they were talking about coming over here for a couple of weeks recording, That would be great because they're really talented guys, They just need a good production, And yes, that would be great to take them over here, So it's getting busy, that's for sure. It's getting busy.
Where can people follow you for any updates on the happenings on the studio or anything musically you got going on?
Yeah, it's usually Facebook on Sonic Train Studios. That's where everything happens pretty much, or Andy LaRocque Official on Facebook, but not much is happening right on that page right now, but soon,
Keep an eye out. Well, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to talk to you about everything you've been doing and in the studio and all these classic albums. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. And sorry for getting you up that early.
No, all good. That's good.
No, this is perfect.
I got the whole day ahead of me now, so I'm good.
All right, cool.
For Austin, Dylan, Andy LaRocque, we'll be back next week talking about the riffs we love here on Riff Worship. Thanks for joining us.